So some of my buddies have asked me to put together a little YouTube video talking about how to sharpen a knife. Sharpening knives is something I really like doing a lot, and I think I'm pretty good at it. And so I want to teach you today how to sharpen a knife. But I'd like to start by reading a Bible verse that means a lot to me, and I see a lot in this Bible verse. Every time I sharpen a knife, I'm thinking about this verse. It really means a lot to me. In Proverbs 27, chapter 27, verse 17, it says, "Iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another." And when we go through the points of sharpening a knife, I'm going to basically explain it to you, but also I just would like to maybe wrap it up by showing you how that verse really does mean a lot with regard to actually how you go about sharpening a knife. I've tried every different way that there is to sharpen a knife, and they all work, but some are much harder than others. And so what I'm going to try to show you today is the easiest way to sharpen it. But before we do that exactly, I want to show you just a few tools. Everybody should have a whetstone. Mine's broken, but it's a good stone to use. It's got two sides. One's a little coarser than the other, and you need to have both of those. This is a electric sanding device. It has a disc sander on one end and a 1-inch belt sander on the other, and both of these are really useful if you're having to repair a broken blade or a bad blade or a blade that's torn up. You may need to actually grind some steel away, but this is not useful for sharpening a knife. It's useful for getting a knife ready to be sharpened. The thing that I've found to be the most useful is a really simple set of wheels that would be mounted onto a 6-inch grinder, and you can get a 6-inch grinder at any tool place. You want to take the guards off. This grinder is going to turn toward me when I turn the motor on, and that's the way I like to sharpen it. Some people will turn it around backwards and have the wheel turning in the opposite direction, and I'll explain to you, how you hold the knife. And that's a really important aspect of it. But my wheel turns toward me. That's just the way I work it better. These two wheels are both made of paper. Some people say this is an MDF board, but it's basically dense paper. And this is what the wheels look like when you get them online, or you can make them yourself. They're really not hard to make. This is made of paper, and when we mount it onto the sharpening wheel, we're going to dress the paper with white jeweler's rouge. That turns black after you have sharpened a few knives on it, as you can see, but this side is for buffing or polishing the blade after it's been sharpened. And you always want to use white jeweler's rouge, but this is what the sharpening disc looks like, or the polishing disc looks like before it's ever had a knife placed on it. You'll notice that it has 1-inch grooves cut into it. It's 3/4 inches wide. That's about the size that I like. So this paper wheel looks the very same as that when they make it, except they didn't cut the grooves in it, and they took carpenter's glue and smeared a really thin layer of carpenter's glue on it, and then they poured silicone carbide, which is a gritty material that's basically a metal in a very fine powder form, onto a piece of butcher paper. And after they smeared some carpenter's glue on there, you just roll this wheel in that carpenter's glue until the carbide is sticking to the surface of the glue, and then you hang this wheel on a rod or something overnight. It's better to let it hang for 2 days until the carpenter's glue hardens really well and the silicone carbide's in there, and then you'd mount it on your 6-inch grinder, and you would want to take something that's like a heavy-duty file and make sure that you hold it perfectly level to the grinding wheel until you smooth out all of the silicone carbide. But you can get them that are ready-made right out of the box a number of places on the internet, and if you want to know more about where to get them, you can certainly call me and I'll tell you, make some good suggestions. So these are wheels that I've been using, and they're mounted on here, and what I want to do now is just show you how to do it. In order for a knife to be sharp, this is a 2-edged knife, meaning that you sharpen it from both sides. It doesn't mean that the blade's here and here. It means that there's an edge on both sides of the knife. This is a butcher knife or a fillet knife, and it has a very razor sharp type edge. And you start with the sharpening side where the silicone carbide. The thing that makes this work is after the silicon carbide is placed on the cardboard and it's hard and ready to go, and before you ever sharpen the first knife, when you turn this on, the first thing you want to do is take beeswax. This is just plain old beeswax, and you'll rub beeswax about every 3 inches deeply into the silicon carbide, and then turn the wheel on, hold a piece of metal up against it, and effectively you're smearing the beeswax into the silicon carbide on the paper wheel. So that what happens is when you sharpen the knife, the problem with sharpening knives on a fast spinning wheel is that the knife gets hot and then it loses its temper. And a knife that's lost its temper is no good. It has no edge. It can't cut. It's essentially useless. It won't hold a blade, even if it won't hold a sharp edge, even if you're able to put one on there. So the idea is to, in order to effectively sharpen a knife, the metal filings that are in the sharpening wheel have to create a lot of friction against the metal that's in the knife blade, and the thing that absorbs that friction is essentially oil, or beeswax in this case, but that's what they mean by a whetstone. So even if you were sharpening a knife slowly on a whetstone, you'd still want to have some oil between sitting on top of the whetstone. You put oil on there. That's why they call it a whetstone. And in some of the sharpening devices that are the great big wheels that turn, they have a water bath in the bottom that keeps the stone wet all the time. But the purpose of the moisture, whether it's oil, water, or beeswax, is to keep the blade from getting hot, and beeswax works incredibly well. So I'm going to turn this on, show you how to sharpen a knife using the wheel. And the really important thing is that the wheel is turning toward me. You want the blade, you never want to face the blade into the direction of the wheel. Always, if the blade's turning this way, you always want to have the sharp edge of the knife pointing in the same direction or leaning in the same direction as the blade is turning. Of course, we're going to start on this side, but I just want to make sure you never face the blade into the turning wheel, because you'll catch it and it'll throw the knife across the room and maybe hurt you. It's a really dangerous thing to do. So for me, we turn the wheel on, and you can see it's turning toward me. I like to support the wheel with my left hand, and I'm going to stroke it several passes, cross it, turning it the other direction. Now I'm watching the knife while I'm sharpening, and this knife is nearly sharp when I started. So a dull knife that's more dull, you'd have to work at it a little bit harder. The angle of approach to the wheel is very important. If you want it to be a really, really sharp, like scalpel type knife, then you have a very small angle. 17 degrees is approximately what I'm shooting for, but you want to obey the angle that the knife maker put in the blade to start with. And when I'm watching it, I actually can see a bead of metal, a fine wire of metal that gets locked, that I like to think that blade is giving up some of itself, that the metal is pulling away from the knife or being shaved off the knife, so that you actually can fold that little fine, we call that the edge, that last molecule of steel. You can fold it back and forth with your fingers and feel it lean back and forth. And when you've done that, you've sharpened it as far as it can go. That's when you can say that your knife has an edge, when it's been willing to give up itself at the very leading edge of the knife, or where the cutting is going to take place. So after we've created the edge, after the knife's been willing to give itself up without creating a loss of temper because we've had oil between the two surfaces, we're going to buff it. And you always want to put white jeweler's rouge on your buffing wheel. And you obey the same angle, always turning, approaching with the polishing stone the same way we did the sharpening stone. And all we were doing there is effectively cleaning the wire, the last little fragments of metal off the edge of this knife. And I can tell you this knife is really, really sharp. This knife would shave. I've been able to do the same thing with all kinds of other blades. This is a meat cleaver, and I really wanted to have a sharp edge on the meat cleaver, so This was a really old piece of German steel. Somebody gave me. It's from World War II, made in Germany, and it was rusty and all beat up and had all kind of chips in the edge of it. And so we repaired it with our sander. Tried really hard not to let it ever get hot. We put oil on it, and we repaired it, and then we actually put an edge on it. But you could do the same thing whether it was an axe or whether it's a small machete like you would cut brush with, but you really would like to have a nice sharp edge on all of your cutting tools. This is the best system I've ever used for doing that. I'm sure you can do it. And I want to tell you just a little bit about why that verse matters to me. I really believe that when the Bible was written, it was written in a common everyday language, such a way that a man who spent his time in a shop, who understood about knives and how to sharpen them, the language of those verses would have made a lot of sense to him. As iron sharpens iron, so a friend sharpens his friend. What's important there, I really love the way the English language works, but what's important there is that when one man is sharpening his friend, there's friction that takes place when you have to say the hard things, when you have to tell somebody what really matters, friction occurs. And if there's not the right relationship, if the person who's doing the sharpening doesn't approach the thing that needs to be sharpened with the right approach, the right angle, you're never going to get a really sharp edge. But if the thing itself, the friend that needs to be sharpened, in this case a knife, or in the Bible's case a friend, needs to be sharpened, if he's not willing to give up some of himself, it's never going to get sharp. It's not going to be effective. And the process often creates an opportunity for one or the other of those two people involved in that sharpening moment to lose their temper. And when you lose your temper, you can't get an edge. And when you get an edge, it won't last. And so I really think that the thing that makes that work is the presence of a heat sink between the two friends that are being sharpened. And the Bible's full of illustrations where oil is seen as being a symbol of the Holy Spirit. And so I really think that the guy who wrote that proverb understood a lot about sharpening knives, and also understood a lot about the Holy Spirit. And so when we think about the Holy Spirit, we think about it as being oil. And so as iron sharpens iron, so a friend sharpens his friend. It's the Holy Spirit that is between, that is existing in the lives of two people, that really keeps that, it makes that opportunity for one person to sharpen his friend to be effective, because the Holy Spirit's there. Otherwise, it'd be really easy for you to lose your temper. I hope you'll think about that Bible verse every time you sharpen your knife. And I hope that you'll think about sharpen your knife every time you confront somebody you love with something that really could help them to be sharper and more effective as a believer.